Saturday, so I'm probably available. So I'm really glad that I said yes. And then here we are.
Thank you so much.
The end of November already. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, big sister. So just to give a quick introduction and recall the format for everyone who's online, we have our big sister Femi is joining today for the View Powerfully talk on raising our voices, how do we use our platforms, particularly communication, journalism, to really raise some sensitive issues that affect our lives as young women. And, this next 10 days, we have what we call the 16 days of activism also. And so we need to also recognize the role that women play in communication and broadcast journalism to really draw attention to some of the scourge, if I may say, around gender-based violence or other social issues. So to start, I'll give a very quick introduction, although Femi does not need any introduction. Our sister is an international winning journalist, a broadcaster, a professional moderator, and the co-founder of the Moderate the Panel. She's based in Washington, D.C. We love her Friday dances, the pieces on Al Jazeera. So I will leave the floor to Femi. Just a quick note to recall that Femi will engage during the conversation, and we will have a Q&A at the end of this BU Powerfully talk. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. It's really good to see you. Hello, sisters from around the world. It's lovely to be one of you and to be here with you today. When I'm interviewing, I always ask the guests if they're an activist or they're a writer or whatever their profession is. When did you know that you were that person? When did you know you were an activist? When did you realize you had a voice? And I was thinking about that myself. I was like, when did I realize I had a voice? And there were a lot of things that I did when I was very young that I had no idea it was not a plan. And I had qualities that I didn't realize basically indicated that I had a voice. It's only really now thinking about it, I was like, oh, this started when I was a kid. Let me give you an example. When I was 7 years old, I grew up in London. My parents are from Lagos, Nigeria, and they were immigrants and they went to the UK to study, and then they had kids and they never quite went back home. So I grew up as a little Nigerian London girl, and on Friday nights we would go swimming, and then we would come home and we'd eat rice and peas and chicken and red stew. And around the kitchen table I would ask everybody what happened to them that week. I would news gather, and then I would do a newscast as a 7-year-old sitting at the table doing everybody's news. I had no idea, if you think about it, that a little kid doing the news, using family news as the rundown of the news show, that is me having a voice and not realizing I had a voice. When I was 14 years old, I worked for a big London radio station called the London Broadcasting Corporation, LBC, and I was a young reporter for the kids radio station. When I went to university, I also worked at the BBC and commercial radio. So by the time I was in my early 20s, I'd had all of this experience. I'd had 6 years of experience of broadcasting before I'd even left university. These are moments where I realized I had a voice. I didn't know it, but I actually had a voice and I was using my voice, but I wasn't aware of it. But all of these things indicate that I had a personality where I wasn't afraid to speak up. I wasn't afraid to stand up. I worked in the BBC for 10 years before I moved to Atlanta to work for CNN for another 10 years. And at the BBC, if there was ever anything that I wanted to do or a project I wanted to work on, I would go and see the head of that department. So I would have been 21, 22. I would knock on the door of the head of programs at the BBC, sit down and have a chat with the head of programs at the BBC. I was a kid and I had no idea that these were things that you didn't do. And I just thought, oh, I would like to do this. I'm going to go and talk to them, have a little chat with them. And it was that I didn't have an awareness that this was having a voice, using my voice, until much later. People often think that, oh, if you're a journalist, you have a platform. Actually, if you're in the media, you have a platform. I think the difference with journalism, and there is quite a fine line between journalism and activism. And that line is, for me, the purpose, my definition of a journalist is somebody who communicates, who tells your story, who keeps you informed. What I think and what I feel is not necessarily part of the story. Sometimes it is, but often it isn't. That I am doing my very best to tell the perspectives of this story and share it with you. That is what I'm trying to do as a journalist. If you're an activist, this is my definition, but I know all of you are going to have different definitions for this. If you're an activist, what you're doing is trying to change the story. The story is the status quo and you want to change that story. You don't want that story to keep going, you want to change it. If I start changing a story, you'll be saying, well, that's fake news. By the way, I hate that phrase. Please don't use that phrase ever again. You made that up. Why are you opinionated? Just tell us the facts. So that for me is the difference between, as a journalist using my voice, I'm using my voice to tell your story, and then as an activist using your voice to change the story. I think those are two different things. There are journalists who are activists. There are activists who are journalists, and there is a crossover. For instance, if I tell you some of the stories that we have done on the stream, which is the Al Jazeera show that I host, End SARS, which is about police brutality in Nigeria. We did a big show about that back in October. We've been covering Ethiopia and the conflict in the northern region, Tigray region. So there's a regional force that is fighting a federal force. Covered that story, particularly the humanitarian perspective. Just talked about child poverty in New Zealand, and also Black Lives Matter protesters in the US being arrested for tiny misdemeanors on no reason at all and being prosecuted. If you look at that list, you'd think, well, your show is an activist show. And it's really, for the stream, the show really is about what are the stories that aren't being told? What are the stories that aren't being told with the people who are in the story so they can share their own voices? And so I would say definitely the stream, like Al Jazeera, is looking for the stories that are underreported, the stories that don't necessarily, the people who don't necessarily have a voice. And on the stream, we say we amplify your voice, not our voices. We're not going to yell and shout as opinionated journalists. We are trying to tell your story. So what I wanted to do was tell you two things. So one, about journalism, and if you care about particular issues, where should you go and work? What should you try and do? And the other one is, as an activist, if you're hoping to use your voice and use the media, what should you do? Because there are different strategies and different techniques. So as a journalist, if you come to journalism wanting to have an impact on the world, to change the world, if you care about the stories you report, make sure you're working at a platform or a network or an organization that also has the same philosophy and point of view as you. So I could list all those stories, and there'll be certain networks that wouldn't care about any of those stories that I just told you that the stream just did, or even sometimes other programs on the same network. So you have to work out, where can I do the work that I would love to do? And then you find that. It's like finding a partner, finding a best friend, finding somebody where you balance each other out. So you will have a battle if you're trying to go and do stories as a journalist and that platform doesn't cover those stories. If you're on a platform or a news organization or a radio station that covers local news and you want to tell world news because you want to be a foreign reporter, that's not going to happen. They're going to get really bored with you. If you're working at a network that is very much about sensationalized news stories, the big stories of the day, and you want to do the little stories about person on the street, that's not going to work out well. But there are times when you can actually use the power of your voice to actually make a change. And I will give you an example of that at CNN. So I was at CNN from 1999 to 2008, so almost 10 years. And when I got to CNN, there was no show about the African continent. Now there are 3 or 4 different shows about African voices, African personalities. There were a number of different shows, but when I got there, there were no shows. And the journalists in the newsroom were scared to write news stories about the African continent because they were complicated. How do you write about the latest about the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo? How do you tell the latest story about Ethiopia, which is really complicated because it goes back, not just what's happening right now, it goes back many years. The roots of the Tigray conflict go back many years, and the newsroom in Atlanta, Georgia, often was worried about telling stories from the African continent. They told the stories which were the easy stories to tell. So the conflict stories, the bad news stories, and anybody who comes from the developing world or comes from the African continent will be rolling their eyes right now. You know the stories that I'm talking about: famine and war and disease. So all of those stories would make it into CNN's newscasts. But the more complicated stories, the stories that round us as a people in the developing world, those stories weren't told. You could hear stories about culture across Europe. You could hear stories about culture across Latin America, North America, of course, culture across Africa, not so much. And so there were a group of us, there were 3 or 4 of us, who thought, how do we bring Africa to CNN? Africans love CNN, but their stories aren't necessarily told on CNN. So we hijacked a newscast on a Saturday, actually, like a Saturday like today, and a newscaster called Jim Clancy and myself, we wrote African news into the newscast. So he did the Saturday newscast. So the first half of the newscast was what the newsroom was putting out. The second half of the newscast was all African stories. We put all the stories together, and then at the end, because at the time I was a weather forecaster, long story, not going to tell you in this talk, but you can ask me questions about it. I would then do a forecast for Africa and do news stories about Africa. So we just took over a newscast. And from that developed a show called Inside Africa. There were about a handful of us who worked on that show, who all loved and cared about the African continent. And we changed an entire network's approach to covering a continent because we cared, because we did it. And the reason I stayed at CNN for so long, almost a decade, was because I was scared that if I left, what would happen to Inside Africa? And I stayed too long. Wow, I stayed so long. I stayed a decade because I worried about this show that we created, that we cared about, that we fought for. For instance, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was the first female African head of state. I wanted to cover that story. It was a great story from the African continent. It was the sort of story that CNN should be covering. They said they had no money because Hurricane Katrina had sucked out all of the resources and they couldn't cover the story. And I thought, that's not possible. We have to do this story. How are we going to get the money? And I campaigned and I found a fellowship from the UNDP and the National Association of Black Journalists, sending journalists to Liberia, can you believe this, to cover the Liberian elections. I sat all weekend writing up story ideas and pitches. I completed the fellowship. I put the fellowship in. The following week, they told me I got the fellowship. The next few days, they said, we're going to fly you to Liberia to cover the story. And then I told my vice president at CNN, it's okay, I've got the money. We can cover Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And then they wouldn't give me a camera person. I can't D2V without a camera person. And I was just, what else am I going to do? I have to make this happen. And I'm not too proud to say it, I begged. I told them, you cannot not do this story. We have to do this story. So they gave me the camera person from the Johannesburg Bureau. He flew to Liberia. I flew to Liberia. We covered the first leg of the Liberian elections, where Ellen Johnson Sirleaf eventually became the first female African head of state. If you look now at the way CNN frames their coverage of the continent and milestone coverage of the continent, in it will be the coverage of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first African head of state. And the only reason that happened was because I was determined to not let that story go. That is using your voice. I could have got fired, but I didn't. But that's an example of using your voice. I think using your voice is just passion and determination. And if someone says no to you, what then do you do to see how you get to yes? That's the journalism part, how you use your voice as a journalist. As an activist, there are lots of strategies that you can use to bring your story to the public. And I want to give you one piece of advice of an activist. If you are approaching journalists and news organizations, get to know what they cover. What do they do? How do they do it? Watch the coverage. Will your story fit in with their coverage? Who do you think will be best at doing their story? Think about them as a platform and what makes sense on that platform. Often I will get requests, Femi, I would like you to interview me. Well, I don't do an interview show. I have a discussion show. So if you really are watching the stream or you're watching any of the work that I do, then you know that we have a discussion. There are 2, maybe 3 people, very rarely a single person in a discussion. So anyone who comes to me and says, I want you to interview me, or often I want you to interview my boss. Well, what is the premise of that? How would you do that? How does that fit into the stream and the way the stream does stories? So that is the first mistake. Just thinking that your story should be on TV or should be on the radio without thinking, does this radio show do stories like this? Who does those stories? Does this publisher do stories like this? Who does those stories? And then you fit those stories to the platform. You will find that your pitching and your success about getting the word out is much more successful that way. And also cultivating relationships, chatting to people, chatting to them when you don't want anything, chatting to them about what they're working on, what they're interested in, what are they looking at? Are they looking for stories? All of those things make you a very successful activist if you're hoping to use the media. I'm going to conclude this first little bit by talking about using your voice is really just using your passion and not being afraid to be able to do that. Whether you want to be a journalist, whether you are already an activist, or whatever you're doing in your line of work, what happened with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf on Inside Africa was a workplace incident, okay? It was a project that I wanted to do that my bosses said they had no money to do. So how did I work out how to do that? You can do that in whatever field you're in, whatever your challenges are. You work out, what is my project to turn that no into yes? That is how I operate life. It is very tedious for people around me because I choose, everything is a project. I go back in the olden days, you know, when we used to go out, back in the olden days, I would be out with my younger sisters and they always knew that I was a campaigner. So for instance, we'd be sitting, I'd take my sisters out and we'd be sitting at a restaurant. Something happened to the order. The order didn't turn up. And I'd have a word with the waiter, we'd have a little conversation. And then my sister would say, don't do that thing that you do. And I didn't even know at the time what was that thing that I did. But that thing that I did was, excuse me, we have been waiting 30 minutes for our meal, so I am not expecting to have to pay for it. And my sisters would be cringing with embarrassment. I'm the eldest, and so they're younger. They would be so upset that I did it. But we got a free meal and lots of apologies, and everything made it worthwhile in terms of turning a bad experience into a positive experience. But my sister's cringing, doing, don't do that thing that you do, is the thing that I'm saying, do that thing, okay? Speak up, use your voice. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't need to be. In fact, people don't respond well necessarily to aggression. What they respond well to is persuasion which is why I'm sitting here right now. I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thanks for having me.
Femi, big sister, you have fueled us with so much passion. So much passion. I'm looking online on the Twitter platform, in the chat box, just to give a bit of some very good quotes you gave us. Using your voice is your passion. It's using your passion. It's not being afraid of the no's. It's also turning all the negatives into positives and making sure that you do so with a smile and with conviction, which we've all felt today when you were sharing some very interesting life experiences that you've been through. I'm going to open the floor. Sisters, if you have questions, please raise your hand or just come in. And please remember to introduce yourself so that Femi knows your name and can come back to you. Thank you so much.
Hello, Verlan. Hello, sisters. Hello, Femi.
Hi.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure. We've met before a few times.
I recognize your face. I was talking and your face popped up. I was like, hey.
Yeah. I like to use my hand movement since I can't.
Yeah, hi,
what
Joanna. Hi.
I really I'm trying to learn more about Nigeria actually, and I appreciate you as a journalist. I've seen you before at the International Peace Institute, and I saw before a video of you with the Secretary General, and also at the Great Green Wall party.
That was a great party, wasn't it?
Oh yes, it was fantastic. The music was amazing. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Before the virus, times before the virus.
Last year, yeah.
Right. During the General Assembly. And so I've seen you take on you draw out what you think would be valuable for people to hear. And I've also seen you as the moderator before. I think it was the advisors, the special advisors to the Secretary General, and Jeffrey Sachs was there.
Yes.
And I've seen you multiple times. I follow you on Twitter and AJ Stream, and I see I'm trying to learn more about Ethiopia. So I have a familiarity with what you bring to the world, and it's really fantastic. And so I have a few questions. I just want to give you all my respect. I studied journalism. I studied radio broadcasting for 4 years at a station in California, where I had a lot of freedom. I could just go in. I knew the code on the wall. I could go in and do my training, but I also went through a program. But I did this program twice because I want to bend the status quo to a more efficient working pace.
Joanna, I'm a moderator, so I'm going to say, Joanna, what is your question? Go ahead.
Okay, great.
Right.
So I studied journalism. I want to work in mediation. I'm particularly, there are many regional things that I have, that I'm called to work in. I'm going to be studying Arabic also, and to hit more of these regional interesting points. I'm interested in using radio to help share the good news about peace and justice. I've spent a lot of time at the UN for the last 8 years. I've been to thousands and thousands of meetings. I work on a bunch of different things. So I'm very bold at this point. But in moderating, it's a very sensitive, every word choice is of the utmost importance. So I'm wondering what I can learn from you in moderating so that, I am.
Okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause you there. What you
Okay.
can learn from me from moderating is actually, I'm going to tell you one thing, because there are many things. And I have an entire company because I appreciate that not everybody knows how to moderate. Is moderate. So I moderated you just there. I said, Joanna.
Yes.
What's your question?
Right.
Go ahead.
Right. Well, I did write them
pause,
down. I wrote them down
pause,
right here.
pause there. So I'm moderating. So the thing is to moderate, because I know that you are a storyteller and you wanted to tell me a big, long story. And if I hadn't said, Joanna, go ahead, you would have continued to talk.
Right.
And
I did write down the 5 points.
Exactly, right? And you've got several questions, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to answer one question, because there are lots of people who would like to ask questions.
Right.
So again, I am moderating right here. So my thing is moderate. If a speaker is speaking for quite a long time and everybody's like, Joanna's question is going on forever, when is she going to stop? Now I am thinking that too as a moderator. So I just moderated you. So my one tip would be absolutely moderate, be fearless. Now you don't have to be mean. Okay, I have seen mean moderators and I try not to be a mean moderator, but I have told heads of state to stop talking. Mr. President, I really appreciate your feedback, but this conversation is about grassroots women on the front lines of climate change. I am going to get back to that. At the UN, can you imagine what happened to me? The front row and the ambassadors just went, because I told head of state, Verlaine is laughing because she knows what this is like. I told her, I wrapped up a head of state. I have done it multiple times, but I am asked to moderate. I moderate it because that particular head of state, wow, that particular head of state, I'm not going to mention his names because that is how my colleagues at the UN work. They don't name and shame. That particular head of state had disrupted all of the United Nations General Assembly meetings that day. They'd all run 2 hours, 3 hours long. And this was back before we were all climate crisis savvy and the activists were talking about it, but nobody was doing anything. So this was women on the front lines of climate change, and the stories that they come from all over the world, and they were not being allowed to tell their stories because the chair wanted to talk about what was happening in his country. It was political, it was anti what was happening, and I basically shut him down. So you, Joanne, have to learn how to moderate, and when is the moment to ask a guest to tell them, thank you so much, I appreciate your contribution, I'm going to move on, which I say to you, Joanna.
This is my second point.
Thank you. There is no second point, Joanna. We will chat online. Joanna, I'm wrapping you up, and this is how you moderate. Joanna, you're the best. We're moving on to the next question.
Let's see who asked that question now.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. We can catch up other times.
Okay, there was a second point. It was actually because
Joanna, I'm not going to take the second point. I'm going to move on to another speaker.
The American presidential election.
Yeah, Joanna, I'm moving on. I'm moving on. All right.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Just because of time. I know you don't want to hog the whole time, and that's not fair. So I'm moving on. All right. Next question.
Thank you so much, big sister. Thank you, Joanna. We have Jessica. Jessica, would you like to come in, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your inspirational talk. I have seen you perform many times, including at the Women Deliver conference, and you're fabulous. You know, a lot of times we hear people, especially men, say, especially when you're moderating, you're speaking, tone it down, you have too much energy. And in thinking of the way that you come and you do these talks, I think that it's a mistake not to channel your energy, not to express, you know, where you're coming from, because if you're not excited about what you're talking about, your audience isn't going to be excited about what you're talking about. So my question to you is, how do you channel your energy for the various discussions and moderator roles, anything that you do? How do you decide the energy that you come in with?
That is such a good question. And it's what I look at whenever I'm taking on an event. The first thing that I ask is, what is the tone of your event? What are you trying to do? Is it a technical event? Are we trying to reach the public? Are we doing a rally? Is the tone very, very serious, but you want people to be engaged? So I try and get from the event what it is, how they see it. And then I still will bring my energy and passion, but I'm channeling it. So Women Deliver is a big conference that happens every 3 years. And so last year I was doing the closing ceremony. So that was a party. So that was just, there's no toning that down. That was fun, and there was music and there was dancing. Everybody got up and danced. So that is very different from me doing the UN climate conference. So I moderated the UN climate conference, which was virtual this year, and I moderated that. And it was, I don't know, 35 heads of state, one after another. And they, at one point, don't tell anyone, this is just between us. At one point they said, stop moderating, stop talking, just say the next person's name, because they were freaking out about the time. And I just thought, you asked me here so that I could hold this thing together and to make it flow. And so it's more than just saying the name. That I have to do a little bit, like I thinking about the time, but I have to do a little bit of connection between one and another. But if you go onto UN TV and you see me moderating the UN climate conference from this virtual UNGA, it's a very different style than me doing Women Deliver. So I always say, be you, be authentic, but it's you on a day when you're at a party, or you at a day when you're in a big conference call, or you on a day when you're having a one-to-one intimate conversation. It's what is the appropriate version of you for that occasion. So if you come in, if I came in and did the Women Deliver version of me at the climate conference with the Secretary General and all of these heads of state from around the world, that would be wrong. that would be a misstep and the wrong version. So you take the version of you that is appropriate for that occasion, and then you do it. I'm not sure toning down is the right phrase, but it's what is appropriate for that occasion, and you still bring the same passion to that. I'm very passionate about climate. I was a weather forecaster for many, many, many years. So I was talking about climate when nobody cared about it. And so I really care about it, but I had to bring a different sensibility to that situation than I would bring to Joanne was talking about the Great Green War party at Ruanga in 2019, and that had a very different feel to it. So be the appropriate person at the appropriate time, and you can't go wrong. Okay, next question.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jess, for the question. Christelle, would you like to come in? Christelle en haut.
Krista, I can go back to Joanna's second question. Joanna's like, yes, she's not here.
Okay, so perhaps we'll move on to our next sister, Bosse. I see your name. Would you like to come in? Are you shy today? Oh.
We can definitely go back to Joanna if Joanna's still standing by.
Yeah, good morning. Sorry, so sorry,
Hello.
but I was in the middle of something.
You were doing something. How can you be doing something?
No, because
what? What were you doing?
Sorry, I actually have a newborn. So
okay. All right. No problem.
Yeah,
yes, you that is the best excuse ever. How's the baby? How's the
She's
baby
doing
doing?
well. She's doing great. Thank you
Congratulations.
so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, for this amazing presentation. I actually enjoyed your presentation of advocacy, because I tend to think of myself as an advocate, especially working for New York City government, and having like change the narrative of the African diaspora in New York City. I had to do a lot of advocacy, and so just hearing your own story, of how you were able to advocate, to have more stories of the continent was so powerful, and so I sort of like wanted to like zero in a little bit on the advocacy part. So so how can you give us like more example of how you were able to turn a no into yes? Because sometimes as an African woman doing that, you can be labeled as being aggressive, oftentimes, and so how do you continue to advocate for your community without carrying the label of being aggressive?
Yeah, I've done this multiple times. There's a stereotype about aggressive women. If a man is aggressive, they're described as powerful there are different adjectives to describe a man who is aggressive. Go-getter, whereas a woman is aggressive. And I don't subscribe to that, but we're dealing with the reality of our world. But I would just say, don't let that stop you. So turning a no into a yes is I work out all of the reasons why I'm getting the no. Is it because they're too busy? Is it because there's no budget? Is it because it's too big a project and they don't have the time? And then I put together all of those reasons so that there is no reason to say no. So if they, at CNN, I realized very early on that if I wanted to do an idea, what was more important was not the idea, because invariably they would say yes, it was the money. So I found the money first and said, I've got the money for this, here's the idea. And they'd say yes. So they said no to Ellen Johnson's leave because they didn't have the budget. When I found a way to get myself to Liberia, then that reason wasn't there anymore. There are a couple of examples I can give you from my professional life where I've wanted to do other projects, and then I literally will write a document and I put, it's like a briefing document. This is the idea that I would like to propose. These are all of the reasons that we should be doing this project. These are the potential reasons that you may have an issue with this. These are the solutions to these issues. And then I start talking to all of the various parties, circulating this document, and eventually it happens. Sometimes you'll get, like, you do all that and you still get a no. And so that would also happen to me. It still happens to me. So I will ask and I get a no. And so I will ask again and I will get a no. Not the same project, for a different project. And so my success rate at CNN was every 9 no's, the next project will get a yes, because they've told me no so many times. They have to say yes the next time. Like, who is going to make somebody who is coming to you with ideas, got all of these ideas, got all of this energy, why would you turn them down 10 times? So my magic number was, you know, that 10th project that I'm going to share with them, they're going to say yes. And invariably they would say yes. So all of the projects I got to do at CNN, before them, there were 9 other ones that were actually not allowed. I was not allowed to do. But the 10th one, that was the one. So you just keep asking, you ask, what will be the issue with us doing this? And then you find out, and then you work out, how do you solve those problems so that you can get that project done? Everybody, sometimes it's budget, sometimes it's manpower, sometimes it's not seeing the idea. There's a person at my network that I work with, and it's always good for them to be on board with the idea. Sometimes I just allow them to take credit for the idea. That's fine. If they tell everybody, oh, I came up with this idea, that's fine. It doesn't matter as long as we get it done. So there are various different strategies, but it's really knowing the people around you and then working with those personalities. And so sometimes if it takes somebody a long time to come around to an idea, you start mentioning it, you have a chat, and then you work on it. So it's a project. It's a project getting to the yes. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? How do you problem solve when you want to get something done?
It is. I mean, thank you so much. I want to hold on to you. You know, with all the knowledge that you have, and because everything that you said, you know, it makes so much sense. I think actually a couple of weeks ago, one of my colleagues, so I suggested a project, and then, you know, I was told no. And so I sat down and I said, how can I, you know, write this project to get a yes? And then one of my colleagues told my boss, she said, have you met Christelle before? Like, she's gonna find a way, you know, to turn this into a yes. And so I'm just, you know, so happy that you just reaffirmed, you know, that some of the strategies that I'm using, you know, make sense and they have worked. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And give my love to the baby. All right.
Will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Femi. Thank you, Christophe, for the great question. Our next is Olajumoke.
Hello, Femi. Can you hear me?
I can. Fantastic.
Hello,
Hi.
Femi. Thank you so much for
Hi.
spending your time with us and for being such a total rock star and such a role model to so many of us out there. I'll be very quick with my question.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know, there's such an abundance of news happening almost every day. There is an abundance of stories that are out there for people to tell. And I'm curious to hear your advice to young journalists who are just entering the space and are just overwhelmed by all that is out there to do. What would you say to us so that we are looking at all the stories out there and literally just picking what it is that becomes meaningful to us as projects? Because I find that there are times when I'm looking at all that is out there to do and it just stops at being so overwhelming and never gets to that point where I'm saying, okay, out of the abundance, this is what I will choose as these are the stories I want to tell, so to say. So what's your advice for a person who's just entering that space, so that they go from looking at the stories to projects? Thank you.
Oh, wow. That is such a huge question because I don't know what you care about. So that is very difficult for me to actually answer that. I can't tell you what stories that you care about. What I did was I did stories that I cared about when I was in my 20s. I cared about traveling and not having to pay for it. This is so shallow, but I was in my 20s. So I would pick jobs that involved traveling to another country. And that was my whole career strategy in my 20s. And then when I hit my 30s, I thought, I really need to have a better strategy than where can I go for free and do a story. So I changed it. So when I was younger, I was really ridiculous about why I picked stories because they were fun. I got to go to different countries. They made me smile. I mean, all of the reasons which made going to work a joy. I had just so much fun. I still have a lot of fun, but my work is a lot more serious now. So when I studied, I just did things that made me laugh, that got me on a plane, and got me to meet lots of people. This is not the best advice for you as a young journalist, but that is exactly what I did. So that's what I cared about. So I would say, do what you care about. I didn't think, oh, there were so many thousands of stories. What shall I do? I thought, oh, that job is a job in Jamaica. I'm going to do that job. And that job is going to fly me to Paris. I'm going to do that job. So that's what I did, which is ridiculous. I didn't have a proper career strategy until I was in my 30s. Like beginning of my 30s, I thought, ooh, I should probably pull all this together. So I joined CNN when I was 33. But up to then, I was having the time of my life and telling stories and traveling. I went racing on the Silverstone racetrack. You might recognize it because that's where Lewis Hamilton races sometimes. I jumped out of aeroplanes. I went to the mangroves in Jamaica. I just had the time of my life. And that is not necessarily what you're asking me. You're asking me about what big social justice issues can you cover? I was not thinking about that when I was young. I was thinking about covering stories that also featured young people, telling stories from our perspective. I was telling stories about first-gen immigrants because I was a first-gen immigrant in the UK. I was telling stories that I could relate to, stories that I could help the audience connect to. So I think you have to find those areas that what are the stories that you are particularly good at telling because of your own life experience. How does that help you understand a story more? Newsrooms around the world are beginning to realize that they need to hire people who have experience in communities from all over, because otherwise they won't be able to tell those stories well. And we've seen it with, for instance, Black Lives Matter. And that movement that is spread across the world. There are people who are not understanding how you share this story because they do not have the background or the empathy for the people whose story it is that they're supposed to be telling. The Grenfell fire disaster, you may remember that, this big tower block in the UK that burned, and people on the floors higher up on the fire, they died. And it's in a very rich neighborhood. And so the UK, journalists in the UK, was, how can this happen? How do we not know about this? And they were sort of beating their chest. And that's because you don't have people in your newsroom who know about these stories. And you should be that person in that newsroom who knows about the stories of your community and tell those stories. Or if you want to just have fun, go have fun. Do stories that make you laugh and make you smile. And then as you become a more mature journalist, your tastes, your approach will mature as my approach matured. So it is up to you. I cannot tell you what your passion is. Only you can tell you. I cannot tell you who your community is. Only you know that. I cannot tell you your expertise that you have naturally because of your background. Only you can do that. So it almost is if you have to do some research in journalism on what research in journalism you want to do. But you will find it. You will find that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Femi, thank you so much. I love what you said about how representation matters. And when you come into a room, you come with all the people that love you and the people that you love. I would like perhaps to call on Okech to take a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm Annette, I'm from Kenya. And my question is on how I can find my voice as a young woman. And especially on several occasions, I find myself trying to silence the voice inside my head that questions my credentials. So how do I find my voice as a young person, especially as a young woman in Africa who is determined to tell our African stories? Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to turn the question back on you. When have been a time where you felt I use my voice? When was the last time you felt you used your voice? And we're talking metaphorically here. I mean, when I was doing the whole Ellen Johnson Sirleaf campaign, I wasn't thinking I'm using my voice. I was just thinking, how do I get this story onto CNN? We have to cover this story. So none of us, I don't think any of us walk around the world saying, I'm in Kenya. We live in a patriarchy. African society still has some way to go in terms of patriarchy, although women are so integral to African society. But how do we get the respect that we deserve? None of us are thinking that. We're just trying to get through our day. So when was the last time you felt that you effectively used your voice?
Oh, especially I can say yesterday at work when we are doing these campaigns on the 16 days of activism, and there are so many complaints at work about people being sexually harassed and all that. And for the first time, I used my voice and said, no, enough is enough. We have to come up with policies so that these kind of cases can take on the right channel. Yes.
So it's already in you. So it's just about where's your comfort level and how do you say what is on your mind? I think that's it, really. It's like, what is on your mind? Do you speak up and how do you do it? And not every time is successful. Sometimes people will not listen to you, but then you then work out, okay, is it the way that I approach this topic? Is it this particular person? How do I work with this particular person? Is it this particular company or this particular organization? How do I affect the change? And every situation is very different. So I'd have to know you, know your workplace to really give you that advice, because it's such a general question. But I would say what we can all start doing is working out how to say what is going on in our head to actually say that out loud. Because a lot of it is, like you said, I couldn't not say this. It's like, we have to come up with policies. We can't keep hearing about sexual harassment and not do anything. And then you have to do not only we have to come up with policies, help make the policies. Don't then give it to someone else to do, like then help. Because often people just think it's too much work. I can't do this. The job is too big. Often when people say no, it's because they don't want to have to deal with the consequences and the work that's involved with a yes. So that's what I would suggest, but it's a very general question, so I can only give you a very general answer.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Femi, thank you so much. You've raised a very important point, how no's are actually easy. Yes are hard work. once you get the yes, you have a full process afterward to follow and implement and work on it. I would like to call on our sister Toyin, who has a question. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, V. Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be part of this. Femi, I'm so excited to be part of this talk, from this part of the world, Nigeria, this afternoon. Yes, my question is this. During your talk, you mentioned that you need to be part of perhaps a media house or a network that align with your passion. I used to work with a commercial radio station. I worked for 13 years as a broadcast journalist. And in fact, I was the head of programs for, let's say, 10 years. I, like you said, you discovered you had your voice. You discovered you had a voice, while growing up and all. I discovered I had a passion for women and issues that has to do with women and girls. And let's say 5-6 years ago, I decided to infuse this content into my programming. And then later, I decided to talk to the team to find ways of infusing this content into their programs and all. But the station wasn't ready for that because this content, these issues weren't bringing money. So I want to ask you, I'd left the job. I'm on my own right now, trying to work on my personal brand. Thanks to Zahara Dreams, they've been very supportive, and I'm so happy. Ever since I left in April, I've never felt any regret. Now the question is, in this part of the world, I'm in Nigeria, how do you find media houses who are interested in putting
Well, thank you for asking me the hardest question of the day. How do you find that? Oh my goodness.
Now, how did you find media houses who are interested in advocacy, call it media advocacy?
So let me tell you what I actually did. So this takes me back many, many years. What I would do is I would write on a Post-it all of the companies that I wanted to work for, because I love their work, and I write out the companies. Now I have it as a, like an online Post-it in my Mac, and I would write them down. So, I'd love to work for that company, love to work for that company. On my list was Al Jazeera, and on my list was The Stream. And so I had a wish list of where my personality and my background as a journalist and the kind of stories that I want to tell on my wish list of where I wanted to work. And then I would just check. I would check from month to month, from week to week, to see what was happening. I would sometimes just have a chat with editors or executive producers, not because they had a job, but just because I was wondering, I'm really interested in this network. And so I learned about it. This is also a good way of learning about openings that are not advertised or are not advertised yet. And so I would do informational interviews. And I still have that checklist. I still have a few things on it. I've got a few things on it. And that was my guide for where I'm going to work next. It took a lot of work. I wasn't just looking for the jobs or for the openings. I created a list of places that really suit me, because I know their output and I love their output, whether it was an online publication, whether it was TV, whether it was radio, and I still have it. I could click on my laptop right now, open it up, and those names are there. And every now and again, I add a new one. The list is shorter than it used to be because I work for a lot of places that I've always wanted to work at, but that's what I did. And then you will see, not as if because I'm not based in Nigeria, so it's very hard for me to say, oh, you need to go for here, here, and here. I can't do that, but what you can do is every time you come across a publication, an outlet, a station where you hear something, it's like, that's somewhere that I want to work. Put it on your list and then start working out how you get to work there.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. Appreciate this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Toyin, for this great question. Just a quick note, Femi, Toyin are actually sister skippers on storytelling through Zahara's stream, and she works with the mentors and the mentees to help them tell their stories.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, thank you so much. Just a quick note, sisters, we have only 5 minutes left. I know many of our sisters want to hold on to Femi and spend the whole Saturday afternoon with her, and we wish. But we value your time, so we're not gonna do that. We're gonna be good girls and try to make sure that we keep the timeline for the BU Powerfully talk.
Mm-hmm.
We have 5 minutes. Do we have any sisters who would like to come in, perhaps for 1 or 2 last questions before our sister Femi wraps up and you know, and continues with her day after gracing us with such great knowledge, tools, and of course energy, because energy is also very important. So I see 2 questions. I see Ruth Aini and Truth. So perhaps Truth, would you like to come first? Thank you.
Truth, on my show, when I have 5 minutes left, I call it the speed round. Quick question, and I'll do a quick answer.
Thank you. It's really nice to have you. I've listened to everything you said, so I'm going to be really quick. I'm just starting out my career, and recently I decided I wanted to do media and development. So I'm asking, what are the 5 things that you would advise? What are the 5 things that you wish you knew in your 20s?
Ooh. 5 things I wish I knew in my 20s. That's such a good question. Let me think. Professionally, all right, I'll start with a silly one. Professionally, if you don't wear longer skirts, people don't take you seriously. Like, I had the most awesome mini skirt collection, and my friends, when I got to CNN, I also had a mini skirt collection, and my friend, my best friend, Tumi Makabo, who's South African, said to me, Femi, no one is taking you seriously with those skirts. Those skirts are too short. And I'm like, they're 2 inches above my knee. They're fine. They're fine. And she's like, no. And I retired my skirts while I was at CNN, and people pay attention to what you look like. So that one. But when you're 20, no one can tell you anything. So it doesn't matter. For relationships, I was very big on, I'm a powerful woman, and what I need is really important in a relationship. And I realized that if you take care of your partner and focus your energy on that, then your partner will take care of you. I don't have to be an activist in a relationship. So that was something that I learned later, that I felt that I had to be a certain person and do all the things that I do outside in my relationship too. And actually, I didn't need to do that. Let me think of another one about friends. Friends are really important. And I spent a good decade telling friends, so sorry, can't make it, got to finish a story, I'm on the radio tomorrow, working late into the night. And I think the friends I have left are the ones who really care about me, but value your friends. Like, work isn't more important than friends. And we have learned that this year during a global pandemic. Work isn't more important than friends. That is a good one. This is all wasted on you because if you're in your 20s, you don't listen. I would not have listened to this. Number 4, don't make a joke of when people are disrespecting me. My tool was humor. I would make them laugh. I was really good with my words. And so if I was working many years ago at the BBC and somebody was staring down my chest and I said something about, and you would like to look up here because here are my eyes. And they started to laugh. I started to laugh. I was like, no, I should have reported that person. I was like, what is wrong with me? The reason I love millennials right now is because they don't put up with crap. I love this generation. They speak up, they speak out. People make fun of them and about them being fragile. Like, no, you absolutely know where the line is. And us lot that were earlier than you, we made jokes about it. We tolerated the biases and the prejudices. And what I love about younger people is that they have no time for that. They are, you old people, you mess up the climate, you need to fix it. You old people, you beat up Black people in the street, we need to fix it. And I love that, I love that. And you are energizing me, and I have to think of one more thing. I'm just thinking these things up because I never thought of any of these things when I was in my 20s. I was always looking for the next thing. I was always moving around. I do a job for 6 months, learn it, get pretty good at it, and then think, now, what shall I do next? I was moving. Then do another job for 6 months, get good at that job. Then like, okay, done that job, now what next? So Truth, those are my 5 things. Great questions.
Thank you. Thank you so
But
much.
also, Truth, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I'm 23.
You're not going to listen to anything I said. I just wasted 3 minutes, right? I wasted it because you're 23 and you know everything. As I was. I didn't listen to any of that stuff either. So go learn it and then tell yourself in 10 years' time.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Okay. Oh, I'm going to squeeze in this last one, but it'll be really quick.
Thank you so much, Femi. Aini, do you want to come in quickly?
Hi everyone. Hi Femi.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. Quick question. What has been your greatest regret in your career and life? And then what is the most, what you think is the most profound story you have told that changed your life?
I don't know what's my profound regret because I'm not dead yet. So I don't know, because maybe it's still to come. Hopefully not. But I'm an optimist, so optimists tend not to have deep regrets because you're thinking, oh, I can do better next time. And I always think that. I always think I can learn from my mistakes and do better next time. So I'm not thinking that was the biggest disaster in my life. I'm thinking I learned from that. How do I not have that happen to me again? So I would never think of it like in that way. I would always look for the positive. And the story that deeply impacted me, I think perhaps, and I tell it a lot about, and I may not have done it yet, but I think about covering the first female African head of state, going from an absolutely no, you can't do it, to an extraordinary time in Liberia where we brought Liberia to the world. We told a good news story from the African continent, somehow found the money, somehow found the camera person. And I don't think it changed my life, didn't change my life, but it made me realize that you can do anything, and something that seemed impossible, you can do that. Thank you for having me, everybody.
On this powerful last note, you can do anything and nothing is impossible. Femi.
Yes, I'm moderating over.
Joanna, hi.
Hi.
Femi, thank you so much for gracing us today. Thank you for the beautiful, powerful energy that you've given us. I'm sure everyone feels it. The video will be live streaming